Dion Hinchcliffe here, VP and Principal Analyst at Constellation Research, covering CIO topics and future of work.
And I'm Doug Henschen, VP and Principal Analyst, covering data to decisions. And we're your co-hosts for episode 63 of CRTV.
That's right. We're here as usual to talk about news, trends, and innovations in enterprise technology.
And in this episode, following the news, our colleague Larry Dignan talks about Q2 earnings. And then Andy ThurAI takes a stab at separating generative AI hype from reality. And then, Dion, what are we wrapping up on?
Well, Doug, in our final segment, we're going to look at two of the newest lists in the coming wave of Constellation Shortlists. Yes, it's that time of year again. We're updating them, and they're due out later this month. But first, let's get to the news and welcome Constellation Insights Editor-in-Chief, Larry Dignan.
Hello there.
Hey, welcome, Larry. It's normally a slow time of year news-wise, but you've been cranking out the insights at constellationnr.com/blog. What's piquing your interest this week?
Well, there's been a lot of earnings reports that we've been tracking, and the question du jour is what generative AI features these vendors have, and then the next question is how are you going to monetize this? So there's going to be this push and pull, and right now there seems to be three different ways to monetize generative AI. One is sort of do what Microsoft did, where it's $30 a head for these co-pilots to add on to Microsoft 365 license. The other one is more just kind of embedded, get people used to using it, and then raise prices later. So there were a few earnings conference calls where they were talking about that, where they say, they want to roll out these features to closed groups, customers, see what they do with them, and then, capture more value later. So that's more like you embed the generative AI as like an ongoing feature, and then you raise prices later. Shopify was talking about that, where, you see the value. The small businesses see the value in AI tools and they don't push back when you raise prices. Then the other one is more like you come out with totally different SKUs. So ServiceNow, they have, their ITSM Pro, etc. Now you're going to have Pro Plus. So it's another SKU that'll have generative AI embedded. But what's interesting here, and here's where I think we're going to get the pushback, a lot of the vendors talk about, hey, we're rolling out these new features. They're going to boost productivity XYZ. We want to capture like 10% of that value that the customer's getting. And that's where I think, that translates to increases, but then you also translate into value. And that's where I think it's going to get a little messy, because those value-based deals, you're sort of, enterprises want to have those fixed costs. They pay what they pay, and then they get all the value. It's going to be interesting to see how much value these enterprises want to give back in either, productivity savings or higher license cost or whatever.
So Larry, let's step back a bit. So is this company's talking about, because very few generative features are generally available at this, they're still in preview. So right. In these earnings calls, are these executives projecting ahead, or are we just seeing a few examples where the capabilities have actually been released and they've detailed how they're going to
They're mostly in preview now. But, since Microsoft outlined how they were monetizing it, then analysts are trying to, anybody who's listening to Wall Street analysts, they're all about their models, right? So they're trying to build in these, monetization models in the future. And that's what they're trying to pin the executives down on. So, as these features go live, this is where the tug of war will begin.
Well, the holy grail of software pricing has always been value-based, right? So that's what I would love to do. If you're having enormous impact on the business, you should be able to get a piece of that pie. And people have tried to do that, but been very unsuccessful. And I've actually worked with a couple of the management consulting firms, the big ones, move from like charging by the hour for however many bodies you have at the client to actually saying, all right, I'm going to make you or save you huge amounts of dollars. You're going to give me 10% of that, but you don't have to pay me any other bill otherwise. That seems like that's the dream, because if you look at things like GitHub Copilot, that is a product that actually provides tangible value. You can say it's equivalent to a programmer for a lot of tasks, and so you could say it's
But who's measuring that value is a good question.
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing and how do you agree on it? It's been very difficult to do, and no one's achieved it on a regular basis.
I've seen quite a few in my space where they're giving it. They're in that camp of giving it away initially. SnapLogic with SnapGPT is an example. They're just adding it for now, and it's kind of we'll see adoption, what we charge for it. They already had machine learning based recommendations, so they kind of added textual descriptions thereof. But there's more to it than that. There's code generation. There's other things. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
Yeah, and that's where it gets really fuzzy, right? Because who measures that value? Right. And, I've seen this before at vendors, like, customers are very reluctant to go, hey, I saved $50 million doing XYZ. That sounds great for the vendor, but as soon as you say that, they're going to come back and go, hey, I want to cut of that 50 mil. Yeah. And then you're on this, and the more value you get out of the software, the more you almost have this never-ending upsell.
Well, and I think the real challenge you have is that, if you have a unique foundation model that can do something that no one else can do, then you can kind of call the shots. But what we are seeing is this, every week I see new foundation models, new large language models, and new versions. There's a risk it's going to become commodified, and they're not going to be able to have this premium pricing. So I think, really the future's unknown.
So yeah, I think ultimately we're going to get to that simple, hey, we're just raising prices, this much to account for the generative AI. I don't think we're going to get into, I don't see how it's possible. It's just too messy.
Well, it's fascinating that you're bringing this up, Larry, because I'm seeing that this cloud costs in general, which is really the topic I wanted to, I'm going to cover this week, is the challenge for many organizations. We were seeing some pricing pressure just in general in IT budgets earlier this year. Now our new digital CXO survey says that pressure is kind of off, and now we're looking at things like AI to capture competitive advantage and market opportunity and things like that. But I recently released some research, which we'll post the URL here during the show when it's broadcast, that shows that maybe the public cloud companies have reached a point where they're for profit. They have to make money on this, and they have to mark up their cloud offerings, and they have to continue to spend enormous amounts on capital expenditures to keep growing all their data centers and adding new regions and so on, such that private cloud is starting to actually look attractive. And I talked to 22 different CIOs and senior IT executives who are finding this to be the case for certain types of workloads, not all workloads. We're seeing some workloads are better in the cloud when you have very elastic workloads, and some are not. And this whole cloud bill is becoming very visible because a lot of the hidden costs in IT that were hidden somewhere in the IT budget are all coming onto one single bill. And there's definitely some fatigue as we're talking about another round of price increases, and now AWS is going to charge for IPv4 addresses, and that's going to drive up costs unless you re-architect a lot of your applications at an infrastructure level. So we're seeing just some fatigue and saying, well, where do my workloads run best? And I think that's part of this whole discussion about cloud bills. And so the research really shows, and this has started a big discussion in the industry. We saw SiliconANGLE, David Linthicum, and others kind of picking up, keying off this research, saying, we really should rebalance and take an honest look at where our workloads run best and put them where they do. And that's sometimes, and maybe for some organizations, often not in public cloud until we see some more rational offerings from the cloud vendors. Well, I don't know what you guys think about that.
Yeah, I could definitely say that I'm seeing it in data warehousing workloads. If they're stable, predictable, performance sensitive, seeing cases where organizations are keeping some of those workloads on-prem and moving more of the experimental spiky stuff into the cloud, so they're slowing their move into the cloud, or in some cases, even repatriating some of these data warehouse workloads back on-prem if they still have on-prem data centers. It's easy enough move for them, presuming that they didn't decommission some sort of dedicated hardware or
well, now you can do pay as you go now. You can do pay as you go now for private cloud too. So I think now we have more choice than we ever had before. I think companies are saying it's not all a blind march to public that we're going to have a consistent set of cloud stacks, but we'll put the workloads where they make the most sense. I'm not seeing broad repatriation and the data is not showing it. I am seeing targeted repatriation. So
yes, very targeted.
I think that's why you're hearing cloud vendors talk a lot about the cloud optimization and helping customers optimize what they spend. AWS seems to talk about that a lot more than the other two, but they're clearly playing a long game, right? Because if you can keep that customer in the fold, then those new workloads are probably going to stay there.
Well, and I think AWS is being pretty clever with things like Graviton and custom chips and custom configurations that you can only get in the public cloud instance. Yeah. And that
buyer beware.
Yeah, right. Well, that's
just to qualify, we are still seeing double-digit growth for the public cloud vendors, even as things are cooling off. They're still pretty hot compared to a lot of pockets of the market.
Exactly.
Time is running short, so I'm going to share a bit of Constellation research news. We've reached the finalist stage of our 13th annual Supernova Awards. So we've narrowed things down from more than 60 nominations to just 31 finalists in 9 categories, and that's AI and augmented humanity, data to decisions, digital safety, governance and privacy, ESG and sustainability, future of work employee experience, future of work human capital management, marketing and sales effectiveness, next-gen customer experience, and tech optimization and modernization. Here's some really good nominations that are now finalists. So now it's your turn, and we welcome you, our audience, to join our public voting period on these nominations from now until September 1st. Just visit ConstellationR.com and look for Supernova 2023 on the Events tab. And then you can scroll down and read about these finalists and cast your vote for what you see as the winners in each category. So that's it for this week's news summary, but stay tuned for Larry's analysis of Q2 earnings, Andy ThurAI's analysis of generative AI, and then Dion and I will wrap things up with a sneak peek at 2 new Constellation research shortlists coming later this month.
Hey all, your favorite AI analyst Andy ThurAI here. Today I want to talk about generative AI, hype of reality. Generative AI is everywhere, as you might have seen. My Uber driver is talking to me about ChatGPT. My house cleaning lady is talking to me about investing in AI companies. I guess we reached the peak. So is it a hype, a reality? I want to talk about it today. So what is generative AI? So it's an AI technology that uses a combination of NLP, that's natural language processing, and ML, which is machine learning, to generate a new data or content that mimics human-generated content. Content can mean text, audio, video, image, code, and even synthetic data. Synthetic data for even training AI models by itself. AI-generated content is not new, but what is different this time is the fakes look so real. I call it as a real fake, very authentic. Some call it as a deep fake. So our conversation today is about whether it's a fade or is it real. Not about enterprise grade, not about productionizing the generative AI, not about liability and legal issues, not about the underlying LLMs. It's not even about whether the transformers, it's all going to kill us. We're not going to talk about any of those things. Just the conversation is concentrated today about whether it's hype or reality. This is just about the art of the possible. Is it really useful, or like one of those other emerging technologies after much hype and disappoint the people as a shiny new object? So on that note, let's talk about some of the use cases. The use case one, where I see this is very useful with a lot of companies, is code generation. Companies are looking for ways to produce very complex code, make code producers, developers very efficient. So rather than training them all the way around, they are looking for ways to use English as a programming language, and then see how they could generate code out of spoken language. For now, it's only English is supported, and then I'm sure there will be other languages that will be supported in the future. As you can see, there are very popular options that are available, like the AWS Code Whisperer, Microsoft's, and then there are a bunch of them listed in here. Right now, it can produce code, regular programming code, or even infrastructure code. So there are ways you could do that, and it's quite powerful. This is a use case I see a lot of companies using that. There are issues that could arise out of this as well. Things such as it will produce security vulnerable code, ethical and proper usage, bias and hallucination issues, legal and regulatory issues when you do that. The next use case, before going there, there was a McKinsey case study that was done recently, suggesting if it is a simple code using simple programmers, it could double the productivity. But if it is a complex code using senior programmers, the productivity level may be barely achievable. So the use case number 2 is about copywriting and text generation. This is what people are going crazy about now. ChatGPT responds like a human when you ask for some text format. This is not new. I mean, Google used to do that when you do a search. It used to give information. But the problem is it used to give you a list. ChatGPT harmonizes the answer and gives it a possible way that as if it'll talk to you as a human. There are tools available. ChatGPT is not the only one. You can see the list listed in here, things like Jasper and Copy AI and so on and so forth. And this is very useful use case when it comes to writing compelling emails, writing PR blitz, marketing materials, communications, blogs, and articles, and so on and so forth. That's use case number 2. And then the use case number 3 that I've seen commonly people use is for generating video, image, picture, artwork, and things like that. These tools generate, based on your textual input mostly, will produce those content, which will look almost authentic. The sample tools available for this are things like, DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, Midjourney, and so on and so forth. Could be very useful in marketing, e-learning, teaching, and so on and so forth. There is also music generation tools such as Amper, Datebots, and MuseNet, and Metazone Music Generators are all available. This is another common use case I've seen enterprises use. So the issues with AI, there is obviously things like lack of transparency, accuracy, and bias, but also things like, the intellectual property infringement and copyright and cybersecurity and fraud and sustainability. And about organizational culture, whether you want to use the code from others or not. So those are the issues companies and enterprises need to think about. And, at the end of the day, whether we like it, whether we call it as a hype or reality, you can't deny the fact that AI adds a lot of value to the enterprise and help companies be more efficient and productive. So if you're looking for ways to implement, I always advise people saying that, use it cautiously. So in order to do that, these are the best practices that I recommend customers to do it the right way. These are the ones you could read through it. Things like, you got to establish a corporate-wide usage policy of AI. You got to review and update often and telling people what you can be using AI for and what you can. And experiment to see if it helps your enterprise with use cases. Pick the right use cases where you can use it and establish that and let people know how to use it. Learn the pain points from the field and from executives and try to solve it using AI. Mitigate the bias and results before you put it out in the wild. And this is one of the things I recommend, which is the most important one in my view. Always have a human in the loop in the high value, high impact decisions. If it is a low value, low impact, you could have it automated. But otherwise, I would always recommend that have a human in the loop. And also, work with your legal teams and corporate teams, HR and others to mitigate the risk and liability. So these are some of the best practices I recommend I've seen companies do. To discuss it in more detail, obviously there's only so much we can talk here. Reach out to me. I'd love to discuss with you and learn from you and what you guys are doing in your enterprise.
Hi, I'm Larry Dignan with Constellation Insights, and we're going to talk about the 5 things we learned about Q2 earnings. So earnings season's basically done. There's a few stragglers, i.e. NVIDIA and a few others. But there were some common themes across the whole bunch of companies reporting. So here's a few of them. This was the quarter of, hey, it could have been worse. If you look at Intel's earnings, they were not great across the board. Things were down a lot from double digits from a year ago, but people were expecting so much worse. And if you look at something like the PC group, what's interesting there is that basically it tanked from a year ago, but the idea was that things are stabilizing, and all that really means is that it's stopped going down double digits. So this was the quarter of revenue gains and earnings gains that weren't necessarily impressive, but it could have been worse. The second theme to think about is the great upsell. We talked about this last quarter, or last segment actually, but not just generative AI, but software vendors are looking to raise their prices across the board. And in a lot of cases they are, or they're adding new products. But the whole theme here is that they're trying to capture the value they create, or at least some of it. So if you're a customer, this is going to be interesting to watch. I don't think this is playing out just yet. But yeah, there's a round of price increases coming, and your friendly neighborhood vendors likely to be a lot more aggressive in the quarters to come. So anybody with renewals coming up, you can expect vendors are going to want more of your flesh. The other big takeaway here is that a lot of people are feeling better about Amazon. So as we all know, Amazon's basically, 3 businesses roughly, right? It's cloud, it's retail, and increasingly it's advertising, which is kind of cool. But from Amazon, what they did this quarter was they beat estimates well. Again, not, some of these estimates were low. Like for instance, AWS growth was 12% in the second quarter. Analysts were expecting more like 10 to 11, so that looked good. But 2 quarters ago, 12% would have been like Armageddon. But the big theme here is that Andy Jassy, who used to run the AWS cloud business, now CEO of Amazon, really put a narrative around AWS and generative AI and kind of what they're going for. So it's a much more nuanced view, and from a narrative perspective, put AWS in the game. Because if you all recall, Microsoft Azure jumped, head of the mindshare game with generative AI. Then everybody started talking about Google Cloud, and we kind of forgot the biggest vendor out there. So Amazon in the second quarter, I think, accomplished a lot. So that's probably the other big takeaway I had. The other one is Apple. That Apple iPhone 15 better be good, because hardware sales are really kind of meh. They're not great. Their revenue was down 1%, which I think was their second or third quarter of down revenue. The one upside here was services. Services for Amazon just keeps chugging along. And the biggest takeaway, they said, is that they have 1 billion paying subscriptions. And that number is just based on scale is pretty insane. So if you play this out over time, Apple's going to look more like a subscription revenue, recurring revenue kind of play. And the hardware's just there for giggles, and to keep you locked in so you keep paying more subscriptions. And then finally, the one thing to say, the biggest takeaway from the second quarter is enterprise IT spending seems to have stabilized, and a lot of vendors are looking for a better second half. And this was kind of unanimous across multiple vendors and categories. So not only were the software companies saying that and the cloud providers, but they were saying, CEOs were saying this about PCs, even servers, networking. So while things have stopped cratering, everybody's expecting this gradual improvement in the second half. Will it play out? Remains to be seen, but there's a decent bit of optimism out there, which has also come up in some Constellation research surveys we've done. So CIOs and vendors seem to be a little more optimistic about the second half. So we'll see how that plays out, and we'll be back in the third quarter to talk about what we learned.
Hey folks, Doug Henschen here, and we'll soon release the latest updates of the Constellation Research Shortlist. I'm here with Dion Hinchcliffe, and we're going to talk about two of our newest shortlists.
Yeah, the whole idea with the Constellation Shortlist, Doug, and all of you out there, is to help speed and narrow your search for enterprise technologies that you need to innovate and transform your business. And so we have more than 100 shortlists that are freely available. You can go to ConstellationR.com and download any of them it's ConstellationR.com/shortlist. And we make our selections based on customer references, partner conversations, vendor selection processes. We look at market share, and we do our own internal research as well. And I published later this month. I have a number of new shortlists in our August update, ranging from everything from employee group messaging to distributed autonomous organizations. So that's a hot new category. How about you, Doug?
Well, I published one new shortlist in this wave, and I updated 5 other shortlists. They're all in the data decisions category. My new shortlist is on embedded analytics, and it follows on the footsteps of another embedded analytics shortlist that I published in May. And it was introduced in May, kind of off our usual spring fall cycle, winter fall cycle. Because I did a market overview on that analytics and BI space. Now, traditionally, embedded BI was used by independent software vendors or ISVs and SaaS vendors, software as a service vendors. And it's a way for them to quickly add reporting and data visualization capabilities to their apps without having to start from scratch. You know, they're not a BI or analytics vendor, but they want that capability within their software. So, vendors in that space, and there are, more than a dozen vendors, probably 20 in that space. These embedded offerings let them speed time to market and lets the software vendor focus on what in their application is truly all about. Now, more recently, leading analytics vendors have really recognized that companies of many descriptions are now developing software, even though they would never identify themselves as a ISV or a SaaS company. So if you think about it, airlines, banks, insurance companies, healthcare organizations, retailers, you name it, they have apps, they have portals, they have loyalty programs, all software-based. And that's why I introduced this in May, this embedded analytics shortlist. And you can find it at ConstellationR.com/shortlist. Now, it's the same idea of easing and speeding the development of things like, with things like microservices architecture, event architecture, software development kits, low-code, no-code capabilities, workflow, and support for DevOps processes. Now, there's yet another form of embedded analytics focused on embedding analytics within cloud-based enterprise applications. And in this variation, ERP vendors, CRM vendors, HCM vendors are weaving analytical and BI capabilities from their BI and analytics platforms into their apps. So later this month, I'm introducing a second shortlist on embedded analytics platforms for cloud-based applications. And threshold criteria include, again, things like embedding visualizations, KPIs, complete dashboards into key decision points within these apps, providing consistent and unified modeling and access control and governance, as well as this two-way contextual interactivity between the app and the analytics. Also, they offer usually pre-built use case and industry-specific analytics, whether it's integrations to popular data sources, KPIs, vizzes, dashboards, and they can generally be extended. So both from the data model perspective, so you can include new data sources, third-party data sources, and you can customize it in some way. So it's too early to name the vendors on this new short list, but I wanted to give you a heads up, and that's our purpose here, to tell you about some of our new lists. And encourage you to watch for this new list and the other revised shortlists coming up later this month.
Yeah, that's a great overview, Doug. There's just a lot of work we've put in over the years on these shortlists, and it saves people a lot of time. So I'm looking forward to seeing that one when it comes out. I have a new shortlist as well, and it really reflects this shift towards digitization of everything around management. And we've seen this with OKR platforms, and I have a shortlist for OKRs. That's objectives and key results, the management technique from the tech industry that's been very effective at growing companies like Intel, Google, Intuit. Notice those are all leading organizations, and they're run by OKRs. But we've seen things like work management get digitized. We've seen things like even personal and professional development get very, very thoroughly digitized. But how about the strategy development for IT? And I've now noticed that industry has kind of matured into there's a there for CIOs and senior IT executives to actually sit down and go beyond the spreadsheets and the PowerPoints that they use now to map out strategy. It's very bespoke, hands-on exercise with the tools that are very crude that have been around for 30 years, and we can do better as an industry, and we have. So the IT strategy platform is my new shortlist, and it allows organizations to actually track and evolve their strategy over time, help everyone understand what that is, actually collect data on how it's going, and iterate over that and manage it over the long term without having to actually build it all yourself, right? Because I've been in IT for way too long, and I've helped a lot of CIOs develop strategy. When I was an IT executive, I developed strategy, and it's very tough because you can't keep it updated. And so you really need something that's living, that everyone knows what it is and what their role and the strategic efforts are. And so these platforms have emerged as SaaS applications that can integrate with a lot of different things. And so they have a centralized dashboard, with an interface that allows you to view what your strategic objectives are, what their progress is, what the KPIs are, and so on, and have integration capabilities to grab a lot of the data that you do have in project management tools and OKR tools and elsewhere to be able to gather and track progress. And what's really important is that these tools have things like scenario planning or templates about, all right, here's how you can do digital transformation. Here's the 7 different flavors of how you could do it. Here's the pros and cons. You can run models on that and see which one might be better for you. So you can model different strategies, compare scenarios, and understand the potential outcomes. And it has analytics, so you can actually look into all the information. Like a real living strategy is actually a pretty sophisticated artifact with a lot of data behind it. So you want to be able to analyze that. I'm sure Doug will tell you a lot about what you need to do there in terms of features. It has collaboration tools, chat and document sharing and so on, so you can bring everyone together around the strategy and track goals and monitor progress and so on. And it really lets you help you do things like resource allocation and budgeting. So you'll understand downstream, what is your strategy going to cost to realize this? Because I'd say a good 10 to 20% of your entire IT budget will be around driving strategy. And the rest is all about keeping the lights on. That's how most IT budgets break down. So these tools allow you to manage 10 to 20% of your most important go-forward budget and manage risk. So you can identify what's stopping you, what are the obstacles, what do other people think the obstacles are, and then you can put them in your plan to figure out how you're going to get past them. And so we see this as really a tool, it's kind of the last thing that really hasn't been properly automated and digitized inside of information technology. And so it's an exciting new category. I'm looking forward to unveiling it and see what the new players are.
You totally piqued my interest. I was going to ask, and then you got to it. Does it have prioritizing these strategic moves based on cost and risk? So that sounds great. And obviously, it's the IT teams are going to have to put in and decide what those costs and risks are going to be. Software's not going to do it for you, right? I mean, but having the framework there is what's helpful.
Well, I think some of them have the aspirations that AI will be able to go look at all the integrated data and tell you where your risks and backlogs and stuff is. So,
of course, AI will do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's a quick look at 2 new Constellation shortlists coming later this month. Remember, we have shortlists in more than 100 categories, so visit constellationr.com/shortlist.
And of course, if you need more help narrowing down technology selections, we also offer advisory services that'll help you pick the right candidates for your organizations. I've done a number of these product shootouts and product comparisons before, and we can really help you get into the details, figure out what you need for your organization's particular needs. So we wish you all the best with your technology selections. Well, that's a wrap on episode 63 of CRTV. Get set for our next episode coming in 2 weeks.
That's right. Watch for our co-hosts Holger Mueller and Liz Miller, who will bring you episode 64 of CRTV. In the meantime, follow us on Twitter at CRTV_show. Visit our website, ConstellationR.com. You can subscribe to Constellation Research on YouTube, and also visit ConstellationR.com/blogs to subscribe to Larry Dignan's weekly Constellation Insights newsletter.
And thanks for watching, and have a great week.
Bye, folks.
So you're growing some facial hair there.
Yeah. I'm losing it on my head, so I'm adding it on my face now.
And legs.
My eyes as red as I think they are. Maybe I should go put some drops in.
I do.
Okay, we got a flub.
Oh yeah, there we go. We have one. All right, now we get to do a little bit of. I can tell. See if Larry's is watching. We can tell him that Larry cut the feed. He's good.
You got a lot of headroom. You're like.
Oh yeah.
Lower half. There you go. Even more.
Even more.
All right. We're too polished and professional. We don't have all the outtakes that some CRTV teams have.
No, guys, make some mistakes, make some jokes, lighten up.
All right,
Well,
cool.
although now we have to crack some jokes and flub up a lot.
Right.
Yeah, so
Kind of happy.
at least 20.
No, we're too good for that. We're not like those amateurs, Mueller and Miller.
Just take some outtakes from them and stick it at the end.
Yeah, just put them at the end. It's all good.
Exactly. All right.